Good morning and welcome. We are here at the Sofigate office. I hope you all can hear me at the other side of the line. I'm Anna Einola. We are starting a webinar on service integration and management called What the SIAM Are We Talking About? And a bit information before we start. So I'm here to help the discussion go forward. There are a lot of people as well as audience here in the office, so don't mind us. We are also having a chat box in the technical side of your end. So, of course, during the discussion, you are going to have different kinds of comments and questions for us. So please put those in the chat box. And at the end of the discussion, we are going to go through those. So we have 1 hour to discuss. We have a lot to tell you. So let's start. Here with me are some very, very experienced people telling you about service integration and management. So let's start with you telling a bit about yourselves. How about Juha? Can you start?
Yes, and thanks for having me. My name is Juha Berghäll, and I'm a CEO and co-founder at ServiceFlow. We are a Sofigate partner. My background is in IT, almost 20 years, trying to help companies to utilize IT and IT consultancy services, etc. So that's my background.
Thank you. How about Sami?
Yes, good morning and hello to everyone. So my name is Sami Laurinantti and I'm a senior advisor at Sofigate. For the past few years, I've been working together with our customers in helping them implement and run the SIAM functions in a service management office environment at the customer. And before Sofigate, I have a lot of experience in the telecoms industry, both on the operator side and the equipment vendor side. So I'm looking to forward to having a good discussion with Juha and Anna. So
definitely. Let's go a bit through also what your companies actually do. Juha, could you tell a bit about your company?
Sure. Well, ServiceFlow is a software as a service company, and we produce and develop ONEiO, which is a B2B integration hub. And the idea of ONEiO is that it enables easy integration for different suppliers, internal teams, service providers, subcontractors without any technical development. And it also enables different B2B models like service integration management.
Thank you. What about Sami?
Yes, Sofigate is a company of, I think we're approximately almost 600 people at the moment. And we're focusing and having expertise on strategy and transformation, IT management and business technology. So we're helping our customers move forward in those areas.
Good. So what exactly is SIAM? So of course, everyone knows kind of the abbreviation, but it actually means service integration and management. So what can you tell the listeners and me? What does it actually mean?
Well, I would say I think SIAM is in many discussions in many different forums, and maybe there's not sort of one good explanation, but it's really about people, processes, and tools. So a combination of those. And of course, there's some 20 plus SIAM processes. Not all of them are utilized by companies, but there are certain core processes that are most likely used by all companies. So it's SIAM is built so that an IT environment, sort of a multi-vendor environment, has certain rules and regulations by which all the stakeholders, all the vendors, and all the IT personnel have to comply by in order to make sure that IT is running smoothly and providing the services in a sort of a user-friendly and continuous way.
Juha, do you have something to add?
I would say that of course companies have implemented this kind of multi-sourced environment or management models like 20, 30 years already, because that has been in place. But the good thing with SIAM is that it like Sami said, it has these kind of roles. It's a different approach. So it's not only about the supplier delivering something on demand. It's about how do we participate and collaborate. So it's about also supplier to supplier collaboration, so they can fulfill and the kind of the customer requirements in more efficient way and more understandable way.
Very good. I heard already a lot of discussion how it could be implemented. So who is actually using SIAM currently?
Well, I think SIAM has already been used for, like mentioned by Juha, for a long time in different ways by small companies, medium-sized companies, and large companies. So there's no one single way of doing SIAM correctly, but the important thing is that every company, be it small or large, has to have their own SIAM strategy of how they want to do it. So do they want to outsource it to somebody completely and make sure that the outsourced party is providing the tools and the processes and educating the ecosystem around it to do the things accordingly? Or on the other side, many companies have decided to especially with larger ITs and complex environments to have their own dedicated SIAM process experts in a service management office or service integration office doing and managing the processes. So there's no one way to do it, but it sort of needs to be in the strategy of each company.
Yeah, and what we have seen is that even a quite small company can utilize this kind of approach of having a external party running this kind of operation. Since they typically don't have that much of resource, and that kind of frees them to focus on their business rather than figuring out all of these things themselves.
Yeah.
So that's also, I think, benefit of having this kind of SIAM as a definition.
Yeah, if your IT is running with 5 people, you can't have a 5-person service management office.
Yeah.
So you need
but
to
of course,
it.
At the end of the day, you cannot outsource the responsibility. So in that sense, you still need to have this kind of responsibility and ownership in the company. And that's also what SIAM brings.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point, that you need to have the strategy and ownership of that, and sort of dictate the terms, even though somebody is operationally running the SIAM function.
And many smaller companies are, maybe it was before, more like if you are quite small, you might have maybe 1 or 2 suppliers. But because of cloud-based services and stuff like that, there are a lot of the trend is that even quite a small companies are buying the best of breed services. So it could multiply the number of suppliers that even a small company has.
Yeah, I think that especially in the world that we're going to, it's very global, and especially if we're talking about multinational companies, they have sort of IT departments scattered around the globe, and there's sort of different language barriers and culture barriers. It's easy for companies to start running sort of island ITs all over the place. So what SIAM sort of dictates is that regardless what location or what service area you're in, you're still using the same processes. So that brings the efficiency of IT to a new level.
And given that, I would say that the challenge is still that we don't have any standards in IT. If you look at the processes, ITIL is not a standard. So SIAM is not a standard in that sense, but it brings the kind of the principles and the way to operate.
Yeah, I think that's really the thing, that wherever you go, let's say that the processes are quite or extremely well defined and documented and can be found by anybody. But then when you start going into sort of unique environments, then you have to start sort of modifying the processes to fit that environment, to fit the vendors, to fit the business that you're serving, and so forth. So that's the challenge. That maybe one day this will be very standardized, like electricity.
Yeah.
That's amazing discussion. Thanks. So I already heard a bit of discussion about trends. Can you tell us a bit more about those? What trends does SIAM actually have? Can you see any development?
Well, if we look at the world that's happening around us, and everybody's talking about digitalization, automation, robotics, and so forth. So I think it's natural that SIAM is moving into that direction. That anything that's manual today should be automated. So workflows and such need to be sort of thought in a new way, and see how robotics maybe can help in certain sort of very manual areas. And one thing that everybody is talking about is leading with data. Once you're starting to have very intact and good data in your tools, ITSM tools and so forth, then you can start having a very good understanding of how your services are functioning and working in that environment. How you can, or you can find things through analytics of how you can improve the services and the whole ecosystem, how it's delivering the services to the business and the end user. So these are the areas that I see that we'll see a big improvement. I don't know, Juha probably has.
I have to agree. And the challenge is that in this IT service area, the data is the new oil, and as well. And companies are now looking for better control and transparency. What's going on when they have outsourced their services, and they want to own the data. And I would say that owning the data means that it has to be in your own, defined in your own way, so that it's relevant for you. It can't be somebody else's data, so to speak. And that's why companies are now, the trend has been that they've been implementing these like centralized service management systems, tools, and operations in order to have the data at their own side, in order to have the analytics and all of those things in place. And what comes to the robotics and automation, that requires that you have to have these things defined. Otherwise, it's, as we all know, it's impossible to automate something that is undefined. So I agree with Sami about the trends.
And then I think one thing important about, let's say, the environments that I've seen is that, like mentioned, that you can have good processes, good tools, but if the stakeholders are not using it, if there's no really sort of a police officer ensuring that everybody is using the tools, the data will never be intact and properly defined and sort of findable through analytics in the tool, the ITSM tool.
So you are saying that the people are still the challenge?
I think the people will always be the challenge. I think the tools and processes are maybe not the biggest challenges, and that's it's not even a joke. I think when the experience that we've been having when we've been implementing the SIAM functions at customers, it's really been sort of a lot of training and educating and ensuring that people are compliant with the way that environment is supposed to be working.
I think that's really benefit of the SIAM, in that from the framework perspective, that you can then have the kind of the common way of running these services and managing them, rather than ad hoc.
Exactly.
Which is always inefficient, and it's really hard to train people for something that is not defined. So I think that's one of the benefits that SIAM brings.
Yeah, and also I think it's I'm using the term sort of policing and governing, but I think also the partners or the vendors appreciate the fact that they know how they're supposed to be acting in that environment. So that's quite important for everybody's benefit.
Very good discussion. I think I've also heard already a lot about how is SIAM actually implemented, how it's governed. You have amazing insights. Thank you for that. Could you tell us a bit more how it's concretely done? What kind of tools are used? What kind of processes? You already told us about ITIL. What else can you tell us?
Shall we start with the easy part, the tools?
Just buy the tool and that will be the trick.
That's all you need.
Not exactly. I think what we have seen within the customers, that typically the SIAM, the requirement or need for this kind of model comes from the fact that there's some kind of quite big change in the organization. So they change the way they run their IT, meaning that they might have decided that they will outsource like big part of their IT services, like application management or infrastructure management, for a couple of suppliers, and then they see that, okay, well, we need to somehow control this because all of these people are moving away from us, so they are outsourced. And they start with service management office, because that's the kind of governing the police part of the implementation. So that's where it typically starts from, and it's just as simple as support processes, incident, service request, change, kind of pretty much the simple stack.
Yeah, exactly, and so those maybe listeners online that are either familiar or not so familiar with the processes when we're talking about SIAM is like Juha mentioned. Maybe the one that everybody knows is incident and major incident management, because somebody at some stage will bump into those things. So how do you resolve issues? And request management, how do you order IT services, and how do you change the environment, and when you have a problem, how do you solve that, and so forth. So there's I think 24 different SIAM processes that are defined in different literature and material, but I would say that maybe those core processes are the ones that should be implemented first. So you need to choose sort of what processes you take, and usually those are the ones that have the biggest impact to, let's say, business continuity or end user satisfaction and so forth. So those should be the ones that you start with. So first you define the processes, and then you need to configure them to your ITSM tool. You can't really have a SIAM function or run SIAM in today's world without having an ITSM tool. So, for example, ServiceNow or Remedyforce, or there's plenty of them. So once you define the processes sort of on paper and PowerPoints, then you implement them into the tool. And as mentioned earlier, then the big part starts. That how do you train your own IT to use them, and how do you train your partners to use them, and that really requires quite an effort. So that's months and months of really hard work.
Yeah.
And also an important part of the strategy is how do you integrate your vendors into the processes, and that's really maybe you or not maybe, but Juha has years and years of and Service Flow has years of experience in doing that, and that's something that I've really seen a struggle in many environments is how do you do that efficiently.
Yeah, and the challenge that we have seen with our customers when they have this discussion that, okay, we have these 5 different suppliers, how do we work with them? What is the end result? What's the objective? And what are the kind of requirements for the supplier, and what are the requirements from the supplier side in order to work with the customer? And I think that the key success factor has been that when the parties acknowledge that they kind of invite the parties to participate into the process. So it's not about putting incident management processes on top of each other and say, how do we work together? Because it's about the process touch points. When I need to do something for this customer, and what kind of data I would need in order to do that. So that comes down to the fact that you have to figure out the use cases, and the kind of the process is defined, but then the use case is the definition. How do we work together? And that's really important part of the actual operational implementation of this kind of multi, no matter if you have having SIAM or not around it, but that's kind of the thing that if that's something that you have to figure out. And that's also the guideline for the people at the customer side, but also guideline for at the supplier side. This is the way we work together.
Yeah.
And traditionally, like you said, that the challenge is that how do we integrate the vendors? Is that the discussion typically, because we are in IT, it starts from the technology. That people start asking what kind of tools you have, what kind of interfaces you are having, what are the capabilities of these APIs, and that's not that kind of. If we take that out of the picture, then you can focus on the use case, which is the how do we work together.
Yeah, definitely. So people are kind of also in key perspective in this one, because it requires a lot of effort to make it actually work. How do you see people in all of this? How do you see it affects on people?
Yeah, I think that's really maybe the most important piece of the puzzle. Is in a way, process and technology are quite straightforward in a sense. Of course, they get complicated the more into detail you go, but then every person has their own sort of agenda. and everybody wants to simplify their way of working. And if they've been working in a certain way for a long time, how do you change, or how do you make SIAM attractive enough for them that they understand that they need to educate themselves and put some effort into understanding and being compliant with the process, because in the future it will be easier for them. So I think that's people are really at the core of this, because they are responsible for inputting information into the tools and so forth, and people, tools and processes don't resolve incidents. it's people that actually resolve it, and understanding how the workflows work in there. That's important.
Yeah, and one important point, because of the people still are using these tools, and people make mistakes as well. Unfortunately, we are not perfect. What we have seen,
yeah, usually it is a human error that causes an incident.
Yeah, exactly.
or some miscommunication somewhere. Yeah.
So what we have seen, that if you can keep the tooling as understandable as possible, meaning that the company or the kind of the end users can use their own language, so to speak, when they use the tool and when they have the kind of use case defined, then it makes it easier. And before it was so that all the parties in the picture, they were kind of forced to change the language when they were working together. And the idea here is that you can keep your own language, meaning that you can keep your tools and processes as is. Of course, when you implement new models, you might need to change the tooling, and that could be there, but still it can be implemented in your own language, rather than somebody else's, like, different kind of service categories and stuff like that users don't have a clue.
Yeah.
And that goes up to the end user as well, the business side of the customers internally.
Yeah, I think that the focus always should be that what kind of language do the business and end users have. Just a comment on let's say the having a strategy for SIAM, and it needs to be well defined, and when you're defining it, it needs to be sort of flexible enough, because let's say let's take the incident process, for example. There will be, depending on how big your sort of multi-vendor ecosystem is, you can have 5, 6, 7, 8 different incident processes, because and especially if you have global vendors that are providing huge amount of customers and large customers, they won't be too willing to change their own internal processes to fit into your defined SIAM processes, even though customer is always king and customer can dictate how things go. But you will eventually make your life a lot more difficult if you make it too rigid, and if it's not built sort of flexible enough that it's easy to sort of input new vendors and exit sort of vendors that are coming to the end of their contract. So it's important to have the strategy, and it's also important to think about these things before you're contracting or doing a new contract with a new supplier, because if you've discussed these things before you sign the contract, it's a lot easier to implement these SIAM processes than if you sign the contract quickly and then after that start thinking about how do we integrate, and what processes do you use, and what kind of sort of resources do you need to do that. So that's important.
Well, how about companies who already have had SIAM in place for, I don't know, maybe a few years at least? What would you recommend for them to start developing on, or what would be the key aspects of developing SIAM?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, one thing that we often do is try to have some kind of a maturity analysis. So understanding that where are you, and again going back to the people, process, and the tool. So how mature, how well are your people using the processes? How are the processes defined? What are the sort of the stumbling blocks in the processes currently, and also the tool. So understand where you are, and then you have to define where you want to go, and you need to sort of think how much resourcing do you want to put into it, and be sort of realistic in that sense, that if you want to be at the top scale of maturity, it really requires a lot of work, a lot of people, and sort of commitment from also the vendor side.
I think that's really important to understand where you are and where you are going, and kind of what is the next phase for the customer. And what we have seen is that, for instance, the question is that if the customer has their first line in-house and they are using supplier towers then to run, having the support processes integrated, can they move in-house first line to some of the towers? What it takes. So are they kind of mature enough to do that kind of quite big change and how it affects the end user customers or the business side if we now take the in-house first line support and provide it by somebody else externally? So those are kind of the pragmatic questions.
Certainly, yeah. You need to understand or sort of know where you're going, and I think it's important to you mentioned the first line or the service desk. That's really an important part of the puzzle because they are in fact end-to-end responsible for managing the sort of the processes within the tool. So the SIAM function is responsible for owning and developing the tool and making sure that everybody's compliant with the processes, but they don't actually do any physical work on the services and the incidents. That's a responsibility of the partners and the vendors and the service managers. So,
and that the end-to-end is a really good point because that affects directly to the employee satisfaction, which then affects to the end user satisfaction. And in SIAM models, the service desk, for instance, in this case, they are controlling services and they are accountable for this. So they need to have real-time, reliable data about no matter who is providing the actual service. So still these old rules like escalation cost and stuff like that are in place. And you have to figure those out because, or I would say that it's really nice to see that IT services are more and more thinking about the end user experience. And that's really important enabler to have the data in a correct format, real time, so that you can provide that information to your end users as well.
Yeah, I think this getting back to the end-to-end in my experience, the SIAM or the service management office is heavily also a reporting and analytics function that it's providing sort of the view from the end users and businesses point of view, and quite often if we look at service level management, for instance, the problem is that often you have sort of your vendor towers and you're measuring them according to some quite narrow part of the customer experience, and then when you start adding those different service levels from all the vendors, then it doesn't look so good anymore to the end user as it looks from the contractual and the SLA point of view. So this end-to-end is really an important part of understanding SIAM.
Very good discussion. I think we already heard a bit about the challenges of implementing SIAM and also about the solutions, how to actually cope with them. Could we still go through a bit, what kind of challenges comes to your mind? What are the biggest challenges of using SIAM and developing it?
I think that there's sort of not having a proper strategy on SIAM maybe is a sort of one of the big challenges, that not sort of being able to communicate to the whole ecosystem of what you're expecting from them. So on a high level, maybe this is quite often lacking. So not understanding it yourself. So how can you explain it to your vendors? And also I think organizations don't fully understand how much time it really takes to make sure that you implement it across the whole ecosystem. So that's really a challenge that sometimes organizations are using this kind of a hybrid model for SMO, where maybe they take a service manager or a few service managers and then say that, okay, you're also an incident manager. So then this person has sort of two hats. At one point he's thinking of his or her own service area, and then at this in the next sentence he or she needs to be thinking about how some processes running end to end and sort of forgetting your own service area. So it's really a decision on having dedicated resources, either outsource it to somebody or then have dedicated resources. Of course, it's a cost issue. It requires employing people to run those processes. So these are the challenges that companies are facing. That do you want to really put into your budget quite a lot of money to make sure that this is running smoothly and correctly?
I would say on the operational level, maybe if I draw.
Yeah.
Drawing is good.
Yeah. So all that end-to-end and data ownership and stuff like that requires that the data is moving around. And in SIAM, especially when you have multiple parties, let's say that you have a end user customer, then a couple of suppliers. Then you run an incident service request that involves more than one party. It means that you need to have this kind of a lines going like this, and then you have to have these, and back and forth. So it's quite a integration challenge, and that's of course what we provide is to solve this kind of a operational level challenge that you don't. If you try to figure this out with point-to-point integrations, it's not going to happen. It's going to be a lifetime. And in many cases, what we have seen is that these suppliers are a little bit worried about what information and data they can disclose to each other, because at the end of the day, they are competing in a way, even though the customer here wants them to provide the service for them.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that we have seen. And in many SIAM implementations, when they have the kind of the big picture, you have the models in place, you have the processes over there, you have the governance, different kind of processes are implemented. But at the end of the day, it's about how do you move the data. So the small arrows in the SIAM pictures that you have seen, they are quite challenging in many cases.
Yeah.
And for that reason, quite often customers start with the implementation, if we now talk about tools, that they invite the suppliers to their own tool. And that maybe then affects the fact that there is some global supplier who is not that willing to work at the customer's tools, because they are then reporting and having the invoicing in their own side of the kind of the tooling. And so they have to do the swivel chair, typing the incidents or copy pasting or something like that. So it's not that, I think it's a little bit 80s.
Manual.
So that's kind of the thing that we see, because it's not just about point-to-point integrations anymore. It's about how do we work together as an ecosystem.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point that quite often, if not always, these partners or vendors are competing with each other. So it's very difficult for them to communicate with their sort of their rival, and there's a lot of this ping pong that no, it's not us, it's not the infrastructure, it's the
that's their
network or it's something else. So what we've been doing is trying to build a culture and a governance model that's built around sort of collaboration, so that these vendors don't need to go to the customer IT, and then the customer IT goes to the second vendor to sort of and be the middle point. So we encourage that everybody is sort of collaborating with each other, and they know who to contact, and now they have a common language, which is SIAM. Which they can talk and resolve sort of problems that they see indications of in the environment.
Yeah,
that's very good, and it's definitely the solution also for many of the challenges.
And also, if we're talking about the challenges, I think what I've seen and discussions with many customers is that if you can always do, you can sort of course rely on sort of tool experts from a third party, or you might have your own, but it's always the first few times you do it, it's usually doesn't go 100% right. You probably that's why you're having a lot of discussions with your customer. And in an ideal world, it would be nice to be in a situation where the first integration that you do is done correctly and well thought out, so you don't have to make all the mistakes and learning by making the mistakes, rather than having a proper way to do it from the beginning.
And that requires that the customer has their own side figured out, so they can present, this is the way we operate, and this is the expectation from our side, you to participate. for instance, change management.
Yeah.
It's a good example that you at the customer environment, there's a kind of ERP change coming up, and the customer knows about it, but the suppliers are unaware of what's going on. So if we are able to provide them with some kind of for your information, now there is a new change coming, and we expect you to participate.
Yeah.
These are the details, and the supplier can use their own tool to take that customer change request and run it internally, because they have their own way of providing this application support for the customer.
Yeah.
So that's about the moving the data in very pragmatic way.
Yeah, that's sort of uncontrolled changes can lead to very disastrous effects, and it's important to have that process of communication and doing them sort of controlled way.
And also coming for these suppliers, they most of them like to work in a standardized way, because that's their factories. So they want to keep the way they operate really standard. And in many cases, the customers and the suppliers bump into the problem of well, everything is defined in the interface, and now we start adapting, and then you start figuring out how do we adapt to these different interfaces and processes and stuff like that. And for that reason, for instance, in ONEiO, you have the suppliers connected already, so they are pre-integrated already. So you don't have to figure out how do we technically integrate with the supplier side.
Yeah,
and you can choose the suppliers you work with much more easier, rather than building them from the scratch every time you want to work with somebody else, for instance.
Yeah. And the expectation on the providers is that they're providing their services in a very cost-effective way. So you don't want to disrupt their efficiency by forcing them to do things something completely different than how their sort of engine is working.
Exactly.
Underneath.
And we all know what is the difference of dedicated resource and kind of shared resource at the customer. So customer decides if there is a dedicated resource working at the customer tool, that's like 2 times more expensive or
For
something
sure.
like that.
Yeah, the human cost is quite high when you start thinking of it that way.
Exactly.
Amazing discussion. So we have about 20 minutes to go. Thank you for the discussion so far. Before starting to get the questions from the audience also, would you like to wrap it up somehow? How would you describe or kind of put together all of this that we have been discussing today? For example, the listeners who go to their coffee break and they should tell about what they have learned about SIAM today. So what would be the key takeaways from your side?
Is it at this point that we reveal them?
Yeah.
So let's hear the drum roll. So we thought about and trying to simplify the world a lot, and trying to sort of put it into 3 bullet points, and we came up with the following. So number 1 is of course focus on business. So that really is why IT is there, and also at Sofigate and with the customers we talk and have a cooperation with. We talk about business technology. So we shouldn't talk about IT that much anymore, because I think any company that wants to survive in the future really has to be sort of in this digital era, and everything that IT is doing really needs to be to support business and somehow bring competitiveness through IT and technology to business. So from the SIAM point of view, it's really important to understand that what are the requirements of the business, and that's really the reason why business technology or IT is around.
And I would add that practical example could be that you don't harass your end users when you are changing the way you operate the IT or changing the suppliers who are providing. That shouldn't be an end user issue at all. It should be invisible. So invisible IT is, I think that's kind of the IT that should be there. Nobody actually cares about IT at the end of the day. They just want to run the business.
And the problem for IT is that consumers are consumerized so much that they're expecting things to work like they're working in their sort of app world. And sort of business is quite often lagging behind in producing these services in a way that consumers are used to using them from their private sort of environment.
Exactly. nobody cares about CPUs and RAMs anymore.
Yeah.
I think then we quite touched the point of tooling and processes, and the point here is that in order to support the business and being flexible is about the tool and process independence. Independence in that sense that you can change the way you operate in your IT. You can change actually the tooling as well, and you can then decide who you work with, and that means that you need to have this independence, regardless of what kind of tools you are using, what kind of processes you have. You need to be able to work with the ecosystem of different suppliers and vendors in order to get the best of breed services delivered to the business.
Yeah, certainly. I think this sort of building an agile environment is important for all the companies out there, that that when things are changing around you, you can always act fast in sort of bringing maybe a lot of new vendors, possibly in the future. That could be the trend, or then sort of downsizing the number of vendors you have. So this plug and play is quite important, that you're ready for that. The pace is just going to get faster, I think.
Yeah.
Very good.
And I think that's also coming to the fact that then companies really have to have the freedom of choice, and maybe this part too is really providing you that freedom of choice. That once like mentioned earlier, that once you have a strategy and once you know what you want to do in the future, then you can build your environment in such a way that sort of you can do what you need to do in that situation in the future.
Yeah.
Nice. That was a nice wrap up. Thank you, guys.
Pleasure.
Great. So now we have a bit of time to go through the questions, and thank you also for the listeners so far. Let's have a tiny pause when I read about the questions, and then let's have the first comment here. So there is also a question about what kind of cases have there been recently? Can you give us any concrete case examples?
Juha, do you want to? You probably have the hot topic at the moment is, I think, in your area.
Well, we typically are when the customer is in the phase of implementing the actual tooling and onboarding the suppliers, and when you guys have done the work of the people side and the processes, and they understand how they want to operate. And the last case that we had was that actually customer, they wanted to change from the in-house first line support to external party, and it meant that they needed to move the data back to their own system still. So they didn't give up. They had a ServiceNow system. They saw that as a kind of a single system of record, so that they need to get the data in, no matter who is providing the services. And that's where we help them to keep the actual ServiceNow as is, and then the processes were defined by the first line support, and they were communicated to the end user, business users, and the actual implementation was so that the data was moved between the first line tower and the customer ServiceNow system and other suppliers as well. And the customer were saying that this is kind of they see this is kind of implementation of glass floor to the production, because they are not actually participating to the first line cases, but they can control it and they can report it in their own tool.
Very good.
Yeah, I think the cases that we have always sort of come to the tool eventually, sort of sooner or later, and but a lot of I think we just discussed earlier this you need to identify sort of the maturity where you are, and a lot of the cases that we have with our customers is building sort of the strategy, building handbooks, service integration handbooks or service management handbooks. So that's at the early stage of where some companies are thinking about what should they do, and of course on the other end we're providing sort of full outsourced service management office where we have Sofigate people that are actually running the processes and responsible and owning the processes. So we have sort of from each end of the spectrum we have cases. And maybe worth mentioning is regardless sort of where you are and getting to the people, we have quite a lot of sort of good academies going with our customers where we bring a lot of different sort of stakeholders in the IT and we train sort of the one way of doing it, sort of the way of working and this kind of academies where we have sort of a well-defined way of coaching the people and trying to make everybody understand the one way of that company to do things.
This is probably something that is going to happen next year also. Do you have anything already planned? Can you give us like hints what you're going to work on next year?
Good question. I think I'm just trying to get through this year to be honest. But I think of course from the Sofigate side there's a lot of interesting things coming up. So maybe you sort of stay tuned, so to say. But I think the basics are still there to be sort of fixed in many environments. So we'll be continue to do that thing and of course all the time sort of work and build from what we've learned so far.
Yeah, and I'm also really looking forward to cooperation with you guys, since we are the kind of the plumbing, making things happening in the operational level. But as discussed earlier, the technology doesn't solve the issues if people are not on board. And I think with this cooperation with Sofigate, we can really help the customers to implement end-to-end SIAM framework so that it's really operational as well.
So that the plumbing works.
Yeah, exactly. And customers can easier work with suppliers, but also making the suppliers' life easier. And at the end of the day, I think it's the first point: focus on business and helping customers to focus on the business requirements rather than solving IT problems and issues.
Very good. Okay, so let's take more comments and questions. Actually, about your comments, some big things are happening, at least at Sofigate next year. There is the IT business standard. Can you tell a bit about that? How is it going to develop next year? Do you already know?
Well, to be honest, I haven't been too closely following that. I know I have seen sort of inserts of it already, and I know that it's not too far away before it's launched. Unfortunately, I don't have too much to say at this point. I won't spoil the surprise when it comes out in the very near future, sort of beginning of next year.
Yes, I was also thinking that it should be in January, maybe even.
I believe so. Yes, I don't know the exact date, but the hype is already building internally,
yes,
and I know
definitely.
that also externally we're building on that. But unfortunately, I don't have too much to say on that front yet.
Yep. Okay, so do you have any kind of expectations how SIAM is actually going to change in the near future? For example, during 2019. Are there any specific areas of interest for you? How about Juha?
Well, I think what we are going to see next year is that people are starting to implement this. So there has been like 3, 4, 5 years discussion on SIAM and stuff like that. A lot of discussion, not much of implementation. So I think what we have seen with you guys at least is that now once again in the Nordics, it seems that we are able to implement these things in a real like pragmatic way rather than the larger markets who are still talking about these things.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm really looking for, is that the real life implementations of different kind of, as you said, it's not defined in a very strict way, but the companies will implement it, and that's going to be the big thing for next year.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think we're far from the stage where this is defined and everybody's working according to sort of one agreed principle when it comes to SIAM. So I think it's quite surprising actually how far away we are from that still. That as mentioned by Juha, that a lot of the companies are still figuring out and talking with Sofigate, talking to each other with their peers in different companies, and trying to get an understanding what's the sort of the best and most efficient way to run SIAM. So I'm really looking forward to having those discussions with everybody in the environment. So,
and I think the biggest, as we all know, the best way to change things is to have this external pressure, and that kind of motivates.
Yeah,
us.
Who has the best SIAM?
But also the speed and kind of this digitalization and stuff like that. The companies the businesses are requiring more and more speed.
Definitely.
In that sense, that you need to implement things faster and faster and be more flexible. And IT is no different, and they are actually enabling role. In this, and they need to figure out how to run these things in a different way. So I think it's kind of that's going to be a big thing next year.
Yeah. The word really is and has been digitalization, and one of the things that we talk in many discussions is that having a working SIAM is really the prerequisite for digitalization. If you don't have sort of the basis in order, you can't sort of go business first and implement all sorts of new digital technologies that then fall flat on their face when they come into this sort of a normal operational run phase. So it's important to have that sort of the platform where everything lands in a controlled way. So
reliability, security. We have all GDPR kind of stuff coming in. So there must be a lot of there's a requirement for definitions.
And of course, I think throughout history, IT has been working with or without SIAM. The question is, how efficient do you want it to work?
Exactly.
Good wrap up. Thank you. I think that was all from the questions. You still have a bit of time to ask away if you want from the audience side. One very important question is that if someone from the audience wants to contact you personally, how do they do that?
Easily. Of course, I invite anybody to contact me, and so of course my name is Sami Laurinantti, and you can contact me directly through email, of course. And if you forget my name, which you probably will forget my name after this webinar, you can of course look it up in the Sofigate internet pages. So I sort of invite anybody who's out there and who wants to discuss these things to be in touch for sure.
Good.
Likewise, you can find my contact details from ONEiO.cloud.
Nice, thank you. Okay, so that was our webinar today about service integration and management. And for the next steps, what we are going to have is definitely another webinar. So stay tuned, because there is still a lot to discuss and understand about SIAM. As these guys already told you, there are going to be more definitions, more ways of working in SIAM. So thank you for listening, and stay tuned for the next webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks.